See, as a human person, we don't design ourselves for those average.
Correct.
We always design for that. How do I avoid any risks? Government should not mandate any standards. I still hold that positions. If industry adopts, it remains long term
Correct.
because then everybody has opted in. Unfortunately, we were taking the examples of the initial days of North America or the Europe. So now you can imagine the arbitrage between the SUV on the ICE and SUV on the EV. 45% arbitrage.
This is a very interesting assessment. Good day, everyone. This is Maxson Lewis, your host on Maxson Mobility. And today I have on set a person whom I call my guru in EV charging, Awadhesh Ji. Welcome to Maxson Mobility.
Thanks for
And,
inviting me here.
and like I said, you have been a guru to me and to many in the EV charging space, largely, right? So I'm going to try and introduce you, but there's a lot more to you, I know. But let me try and attempt this. So Awadhesh Ji is one person who's done your engineering in
Civil engineering.
civil engineering, and then you've also done your MBA from IIM Lucknow.
Much later.
Much
But
later.
yes.
But you've worked with companies. If I were to hydropower, you've done that in Jammu and Kashmir. Central Water Commission, you worked. Dance Energy. Then you also taken an academic stint.
Yes.
Then Hindustan Power, and now you are the director and business lead at Glida, which is erstwhile Photum,
Yeah. Fortum Charge and Drive. India.
Photum Charge and Drive, and and you started way back when India did not even know EV or EV charging. Which was the year you started?
2016.
2016.
So at that year, FAME 1 had just been launched,
Okay.
but nobody was talking about. And mostly it was more from the hybrid vehicles point of view, because at that point of time, you had a small hybrid, mild hybrid cars.
But then how did you get in here? I mean, this is way back in time when people did not know the full form of EVs really. So how did you end up in this space?
Okay, so I mean, this is very interesting, I would say. I mean, I have shared with a couple of people.
Okay.
Uh, when you introduced me, the one thing which I normally highlight is that after doing my engineering in civil engineering, I was looking for the job. Uh, Having not secured any job, then I went for masters.
Okay.
So I gave the gate examination, but since I was not focusing on doing master, so my percentile was very low, and I did not get the admissions in the summer course in the IITs.
Okay.
Normally, the people know about the June, when the admission happens in June in IITs, different IITs, but they also have course going in the winter sessions.
Okay.
And there the process is that whosoever were left in the get qualified, obviously the percentile has to be very low, and they had to go through the interview process, the written examinations and all. So I got admitted in IIT Kanpur
Okay.
for doing the masters in water resources, right? But since being a Bihari, our heart lied with the central, services, the government of India services, and IIT Kanpur, particularly the masters. So IIT Kanpur was very, very particular that the engineer should not waste their time in preparing for the civil services. They were very clear because they were always saying, the professors were that, you are a masters, you are an engineer, and the country need engineers. Why you are wasting your resources in preparing for the civil services? But then coming from Bihar, at that age, these things didn't matter. But incidentally, I didn't complete my masters.
Okay.
So normally in my LinkedIn profile also, I mention it, highlight it, that people should not unnecessarily get a feeling that I have done the masters. I have written that I have got the admissions in IIT Kanpur, but I did not complete. After 2 semesters, I left the master. So that was the important part which was missing, which when you introduced me to. As far as coming to the EV is concerned, obviously, I started my career with the government of India in the power sector, particularly in the hydropower sector. But in 2003, as you know, that government of India came up with this Electricity Act.
Right.
And that opened up the entire power
Power
sector.
sector, yes.
Initially, all the construction, everything was done only in the government sector, be it
Yes.
thermal power or be it hydro
Yes.
and all. But in 2003 onwards, that changed, and the private sector started coming up, in the construction sector. So at that point of time, I thought that can we do something in the private, because I was more involved in the policy formulations, preparation of the engineering documents and the detailed project reports, the planning side, but not on the execution side. And
Okay.
since now the execution was being taken in the government, I mean the private sector, I thought that let's give a try to the private sector. Uh, so I, in 2007, I put in my paper,
Mm-hmm.
and now you can imagine the furor it made in my social circle,
Circles.
because being a class one officer in government of India, qualifying the UPSC, and then where I was supposed to be. I mean, if I would have continued, I could have been ex officio secretary to the government of India at the time of retirement. So people attach a lot of importance to these positions
Right.
back in Bihar in our society. So it was a very strong, very tough decisions for me, but
Okay.
equally as strong. And I was clear that I had to,
Mm-hmm.
be on the other side of the table on the hydropower, because making a policy, advising what to do is one thing. How to get it done,
Mm.
that's very challenging. So that's how I moved to the private sector, and obviously I moved with my strength area, that was hydropower. So that's where I went to dance energy. For a year I was in the dance,
Mm.
and then I moved to Hindustan Power, which was basically a Moza buyer, popularly known
Correct.
as the Moza
Correct.
buyer. So there I was involved in the hydropower development, land acquisitions, environmental clearances, forest clearances. So all those things gave me a lot of insights that how in India you can work with the bureaucracy, work with the states. Uh, and when Fortum came to India in 2013, so they were looking for someone because they wanted to set up infrastructure, hydropower business in India.
Okay.
They are so Fortum is quite big in Europe. It's a Finland-based company.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than a 100-year-old company. They have almost 5 to 6 gigawatt of the hydropower projects. They have nuclear as well. So they wanted to do hydro, and they are purely into the CO2 free power generation company.
Got it.
So they were looking for someone who can lead that business. So I joined them in July 14. But incidentally, in November 2014, globally they decided that they will not move ahead with the hydro
Okay.
globally. And the reason was basically the environmental reason which they were facing in Europe.
Got it.
So that was, I would say, a big shock to me, because just after 5 months, there was a decision that the company would not pursue
Mm.
hydro. But then, thanks to my MD at that point of time, he's still MD. So he said that fine, let's do something else. And then he made me responsible for the solar operations.
Okay.
So we had couple of projects at that point of time. So I was being made responsible for the solar operations. Being a civil engineer,
Hmm.
managing the entire solar assets was sounding very funny, but I believe I have an appetite to learn new things.
Okay.
Right? I'm a person who generally, on the face of it, sometimes I don't accept that I don't know it, whereas I know that I don't know it.
Okay.
So I go back home and then do the research and try to learn,
Hmm.
because if I have publicly committed that I know it,
Then
then I must know
you
it.
better know it. Huh?
Right? So this is how I grow myself. This is how I learn myself. So after the solar, because and then they gave me the additional responsibility of the sustainability, of the safety, the EHS, and all those things. So I was doing all those things. But in 2016, the corporate side, they tried to expand the EV charging business in India.
Okay.
And since we had already 5 years of presence, I mean, the Fortum as a company in India
Company
had
had
more or
it.
less 5 years of presence. So they knew more or less the country
Hmm.
relatively well for doing a business, because I mean, you understand that being a European company, they will not do the business in any new country all of a sudden. They will do a lot
Right.
of due diligence on the country, the business, and all. So at that point of time, they were looking for that, can we do a business in India?
Okay.
Because we had started business in 2011 in Norway when the Nissan Leaf was
Was
launched.
launched, right?
And Nissan Leaf was looking for a partner who can set up the 50 kilowatt charger because I think before CCS, the CHAdeMO was the standards, right?
Correct.
And the Japanese brought in. And since we were the generator of the electricity, we were also the retailer of the electricity. So we were in a good position, to set up this infrastructure. So we started doing it. Now, obviously, we had to expand outside the Nordic countries. And India, since we were present, so
Makes
for them, they thought that, why don't
logical
we do
sense.
it?
Yeah.
And so they were looking for someone who can take the responsibility of doing it.
Right.
Since I was probably because I was civil engineer, I was not fitting into any other business. So apart from the solar, they said that fine, you should do this one also. But before making a business decisions, they thought that let's do the market study,
Okay.
how the Indian market looks like for doing this business. And that was an important element, I would say, because we took almost 1.5 years for understanding the Indian automobile market and then whether EV would be fitting into the scheme of things or not. So I went through the different government regulations. As I said, that FAME 1 had just been launched. So, but while I was doing this market, and we did ourselves. So we didn't appoint any consultant or anyone. So we did ourselves. So while I was doing all those primary readings, secondary research, I found it very fascinating that this I'm talking about 2016. At that point of time, there was a survey where said that world's top 20 polluted cities, 14 lies in India.
In India, right, right.
So I said that if that is the case, and fourth largest car producer of the world, there is a good case that EV would get adopted. Whether it will happen 4 years, 5 years down the line, or immediately, that I didn't know. But there was a clear case that EV would get adopted.
Got it.
And since we had the knowledge of being the first mover in Nordic country, at that point of time, there was not many players even in Norway also, as far as charging infrastructure is concerned. So we thought that why don't we bring that knowledge and share with the Indian customers as well. And that was the purpose when at that point of time, our objective was that Indian customers should get the same experience of EV charging as the Norwegian customer did.
Got it.
So that's how I got into this one.
That's how you became start. You were the pioneer of EV charging in India. I always give you that credit, and you know why.
I would say that at least I mean, I believe that I was one of the first who started talking or engaging with the government aggressively that what kind of policy should be.
Got it.
Because that was the major, so again, when we were doing this study, one of the aspect was to regulations.
Right.
That what kind of regulations would be. And since I came from the electricity background, I knew that electricity is something which is going to be challenging. And we identified those two elements. One was this licensing.
Got it.
That because electricity is regulated in India, you can't sell electricity. And if this is the case, then only the discoms will be doing the business either themselves or through franchise.
Correct.
And this will not be good for the end customer because this is not precisely the sale of electricity.
Correct.
This is something beyond that one.
Correct.
So that's where the larger focus was that I started engaging with the regulators. I brought experts from Finland, Norway, made them understand that what kind of regulations should be. And I think people would be knowing that India follows normally the American and Canadian standards on the electricity side.
Right.
On emission sides, you follow the European standards,
ones.
right? And in this EV space, both these things were converging.
Correct.
Because at one point, I mean, at the one stage, you are trying to address the emission by having the EV. At the same time, it will be interfaced with electricity. So I brought in those examples from Ontario Electricity Board, from the Newark Electricity Board. What are the regulations the government has given there? And the good part was that Ministry of Power or the CE officials, they were quite receptive to these ideas.
Got it.
And when the regulations came, the de-license, then it's opened the floodgate for everyone.
And I remember 2017 is when one of the first panels I heard of yours, and since then I had the privilege of being on some panels along with you. That's my personal growth story, having learned from you. Awadhesh, how you've seen EV or EV charging from its inception in India, and you're one best person I know of whom I can always reach out on the regulatory side. In your experience, what are the, since 2017, let's call it that, or even before that, what are the couple of things you feel are inflection points in the Indian EV ecosystem? Any call out, some some things which have really made sure that the industry has come to where it is?
Yeah, so I think I identify three clear regulatory things. One, uh, when the government made it very clear that the GST on the battery electric vehicle will be 5%.
Okay.
This is I would say, the biggest mover, I would say, because that gave the confidence to the OEMs. And you need to understand the significance of this 5%, because people understand, compare with the hybrid and all. But this 5%, you compare with the GST which you take on the equivalent car category on the ICE
I
side.
side.
In ICE side, your GST is regulated based on the CC, the cubic capacity,
Correct.
as well as the length of the vehicle.
Correct.
Larger the length, higher the
Higher the
capacity, you have a higher GST.
Correct.
And the GST goes of the order of close to around 50% if you include the
Yes.
cess also.
Yes.
Whereas in the EV, irrespective of the size, irrespective of the battery capacity, you have 5% flat.
5%.
So now you can imagine the arbitrage between the SUV on the ICE and SUV on the EV.
Correct.
45% arbitrage.
Hmm.
Now, even if you have a higher cost, upfront cost, but you are still have this gap of 45% where up to which you can bring in,
Absolutely.
right? And I believe that is one of the reason, though I don't know, I have not interacted with an OEM, but I as a consumer believe that is one of the reason that most of the car is coming in the SUV category.
This is a very interesting assessment, and to be honest, many people. There was a recent article about people in the EV space are the luxury and SUV, those kind of categories.
Yes.
Now this is an answer, I
Yeah,
think.
because clearly they have at least this 45%
There's
gap
a direct
which they
arbitrage.
can,
Capitalize on.
capitalize on that,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So
This is
so
one.
so that was a very and clear signal to the market, because they refuse to give the same treatment on the hybrid.
Correct.
And prior to that, what was happening? If you see the FAME 1, in that FAME 1, most of those 870 crore or something like that, on record it says that roughly around 90% was taken by the hybrid cars,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
And if you see the FAME's expansions, it says that for faster adoption of and manufacturing of
Yes.
electric,
Yes.
and within brackets also written hybrid.
Hybrid. Yes.
It was added, I believe,
Okay.
because
Okay.
if you see FAME, so faster adoption and manufacturing of electric vehicles, but there is within bracket there is hybrid also,
Yes.
right? So FAME 1 complete subsidies were more or less, demand side particularly, was taken by the hybrid cars,
ones.
right? So there the government is coming and saying that 5% on the BEV flat, irrespective of which category you have, what is the length, what is the battery size, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, doesn't matter.
Correct.
Whereas ICE or the hybrid will have same as ICE.
Got it.
So that was a clear statement from the government side, and I think that is, I would say, the one of the important, milestone.
Got it.
The second was this again, the delicensing of the charging infrastructure.
Yes.
Because this helped democratize these, the
It
charging.
opened up an entire
Market.
industry.
Yeah, because even if you can set up this 15 ampere socket, and that can still be used by the car for charging.
Correct.
Though we do not promote that you should charge the car with the 15 ampere socket, but technically it can work.
Technically, it is. Yeah.
And you can sell to the end customer. So that regulation, that guidelines, I would say, of 13th April 2018.
Yes.
That's the date.
That's the date. I remember this date.
So this is something which is very crucial. And the third, I would say, the regulation which the ultimately Ministry of Power nudged all the regulators that you should have a separate EV charging customer. So it means GPO or the charging station itself is your customer.
Correct.
It's not a commercial, it's not an industrial, it's a separate consumer category itself. So I think I consider these three a very, very important regulations allowing the proliferations of the EV to happen.
So this is very insightful. Many people start to think of EV as just a vehicle which is here and now, but they have not seen the
Yep.
ecosystem has couple of things have instances have happened because of which it is what it is right
Yes.
now. And I think a
Yes.
lot of credit goes to you. And I remember us going back and giving a position paper to the government multiple
Government.
times,
Yes.
Ministry of
Yes.
Power, this is what
Yes.
you should do.
Yes.
But having seen those things today, where does let's talk about EV charging as a business,
Sure.
be it for Glida or even others. Where do you think it is? Where is it heading? And I know a couple of things have happened. There's consolidation. There is also standardization has fallen. But net for a lot of our viewers who are trying to understand EV and EV business and EV charging from this podcast. So where exactly EV charging lies right now? What's exactly happening in that
Okay.
space?
So I think for the benefit of the larger viewers, I think we need to understand the EV charging from the different vehicle category wise or segment wise,
Okay.
right? Though I have a first-hand experience of dealing with the car charging or the bus charging, I do not have much experience on two-wheelers and three-wheelers. But then, as an industry person, I can say that these four, requirement for these four segment is different, and so
Okay.
we need to understand the EV charging as a business differently for this segment.
Hmm.
So, if you're starting with the four-wheeler, I would say in the four-wheeler segment, uh, we strongly believe from the day one,
Hmm.
right? Because from the day one, everybody was talking about that chicken and egg story, that
Yes.
whether the charging will come or this one will come. We were very
Correct.
clear that charger has to precede
Okay.
the way EV sales. Because as a consumer, see, over a period of 100 years, what we have been used to, we have been used to driving to the fuel stations, and somebody is fueling your car and you are just driving it off,
Correct.
right? So, and when you go and make a decisions to buy a petrol and diesel car, do you ever think that where do I fill the gasoline?
No.
Nowhere. It doesn't come to your mind,
Correct.
right? So that's where I believe, unless the people see the charging stations by their own eyes,
Hmm.
it will be very difficult to convince them
Hmm.
that go and buy an electric car.
Correct.
Even though this can be charged at home, it has a possibilities that it can be charged at home if you have a 15 ampere socket, or
Absolutely.
if you have adequate infrastructure, you can do it. But unless they see at the public places, because once you are driving and let's say you get stuck or you are low on the range for some reason, you
Hmm.
forgot to charge at home, you just drive, you forgot to charge at home, and you are now low on the battery, where would you charge?
Hmm.
These concerns will keep coming to your mind,
Correct.
right? And that's where I strongly believe that when people say that no, uh, I mean, in the early days, people were saying that 100 miles is a good range, 100
Hmm.
kilometer is a good range. People drive on an average 30 kilometer.
Correct.
See, as a human person, we don't design ourselves for those average.
Correct.
We always design for that. How do I avoid any risks?
Right.
And the most optimum risk is to getting a standard on the road.
Hmm.
So from that point of view, the charging in the public is very, very important. And I think, and another view which we have been taking since beginning is that public charging in India would play two-thirds of the charging will happen on the public places.
Okay.
One-third will happen at the workplace and the home.
Okay. So,
Right.
so you're one person is having one of the people that two-third will be in public charging.
Yes.
And why? Why? Because in I think North America, Europe is there's the bigger portion of it happens at homes and offices and less in public charging. Any reason why here you think in India
Yeah.
it will be higher?
So there are two reasons. First, even if I see the European countries, see, most of the time European countries, or most of the countries which we have the examples, let's say Norway or Sweden or any other country, they're mostly cold countries,
Hmm.
right? In a cold country, and they are also very affluent societies.
Yes.
So they have a single dwelling units, and because of the cold country, they have this 15 ampere socket or suko socket they call it in
Okay.
Europe. Everywhere in the hotels or every parking has this socket. Why? Because in the extreme cold, even the ice vehicle requires heating,
Correct.
right? For that heating, they don't use this stove. They use this power, right?
Yeah.
So they have this accessible power everywhere,
Got it.
right? And second, when they, charging has started taking place, or the EV adoption has started taking place, it was mostly by the affluent people. They were living in the single dwelling units.
Okay.
But now in today's time, if you go to Norway or go to Sweden or go to Finland, you find a lot of vehicles are getting charged on the public places. That is on a street,
Okay.
in the parking places. And why it is happening? And then you'll find on the highways, the people are queuing.
Okay.
Why it is happening? The reason I believe is that when you planned the highway charging, you thought that one DC charger and one AC charger is good enough. That's how their entire charging
network
incentive program was designed.
Okay. Okay.
So in Norway, there is a agency called Innova,
Yeah.
right? So they did this way that minimum requirement is that one charger of 50 kilowatt and one of 22 kilowatt AC. That's a must. Rest, it's your options. People didn't expect that the charging would happen in the public places. They did only these 2 points on 50 and and that too also effectively 1 point, because either you can use CCS or a Shademo in that chargers at that point of time. So 2 or 3 cars can be charged at one point of time. So most of the chargers along the highway was designed for that one. Now you have a long queues. So now because you didn't expand it, and that's where now you see the Ionity. Ionity is not setting up one charger. They are setting up 10, 20 chargers at one locations.
Correct.
So that's one. In Europe, you see now especially in Norway, now the vehicle has gone to the multi-dwelling units, and they don't have a dedicated parking concept like in India. So they have a parking somewhere outside their dwelling units. So now they require a parking on the streets and the public places. So the requirement for the public charging is increasing now in those countries also.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we were taking the examples of the initial days of North America or the Europe, right?
So they have also evolved, and
Yes, and we should take a cue from there. Though
it.
from the day one, why I was convinced that it should happen more in India, the two reasons. One,
Okay.
most of urban cities in India, most of the cars, but to the extent of 60-70% cars in a city like Delhi is parked outside home, unauthorizedly on the street.
Correct.
Whether you go to Lajpat Nagar, whether you go to Defense Colony, people have 3 luxury cars, but one inside the porch and 2 outside on the road. Now, in the ultimate scenario, when all the vehicles will become EV, then where would they charge? So they require a public place.
Okay.
Now, that could be a community-based charging itself within the RWAs. It can be a community charging, right? Which can cater to more than one number of car.
Got it.
So that's one. And second, I take a cue from China. China is generally equally dense, to us. I have also seen the Netherlands. That's also a densely populated country. And if you see these countries, they have a huge public charging base, and they have a good amount of EV adoptions.
Got it.
Type of charging may be different. In China, it's more DC. Netherlands is more on AC side, but number of public charging is much more. So there it is almost 1:6.
Okay.
Whereas, so I strongly believe that 1:6 or 1:10 is the ideal mix of the public charging, that you should have for 6 cars, you should have 1 public charging points.
That's very interesting. And so you are one person, you kind of opened up this idea that what India tried to follow is an older version of Europe or their use cases, which also has evolved. So I don't think we should look at that. It's time to reset our expectations on
Absolutely.
the EV charging.
And not today. I'm pushing for the people to look from the day one.
Correct.
That why you are borrowing something which is already 10-year-old, and you are borrowing based on the initial sets of the examples.
Do you hold that same view about the GB/T charging that India had, DC001, that it was antiquated technology?
I look at it differently.
Okay.
So when the GB/T was introduced, I bought that logic, because globally the standard which you had was dealing with high voltage, right, vehicles, whereas in India you had the 72-volt or 48-volt legacy systems. So you need to have that kind of a standards there.
Okay.
But from the day one, I am very clear that government should not mandate any standards. I still hold that positions. If industry adopts,
Hmm.
it remains long term
Correct.
because then everybody has opted in.
Hmm.
And that's how I believe that the CCS2, it's something it has evolved itself.
Hmm.
All the car OEMs now, the government is not forcing.
Correct. It's
Because if you see Ministry of Power's guidelines or Bureau of Indian Standards, they still say that fine, you can have CCS, you can have CHAdeMO,
now,
you can
but it's
have
now or. It's not and.
and
Earlier it was an and. You have to
yeah,
have a CCS2 and a SHDMO
yes,
and a
yes,
generator. Now
yeah,
it's
yeah.
or.
That we recall when we
Yes.
represented to Secretary Ministry of Power.
Correct. Correct.
Uh, so to that extent, I'm open that government should give a fair play to the industry. Government should not regulate these things.
Hmm.
Neither standardize these things. Yes, where they should standardize is something on the battery swapping side. When we talk about the battery swapping, there it is required because the business model is different there.
Right.
But here in this space, the car manufacturers want to do CCS or demo. That should be their call.
Hmm.
And as a charge point operator, I am a strongly firm view that like people have a choice of buying petrol, diesel, and CNG, and a petrol stations is supposed to cater to all kinds of vehicles because
Correct.
that's good for your business.
Right.
Similarly, if you have a CPO, and if a manufacturer decides that I will sell CCS and some manufacturer I will sell SHAdeMO, as a CPO, I should give because I am servicing to the consumer.
Correct.
I am not servicing to the OEM. And
Right.
if a consumer loves SHAdeMO,
So
and if the OEM is supplying, it's fine. We should enable them.
got it. Now this brings me to a very interesting question, and I think you are the right person to ask this question. What's happening on the four-wheelers? Okay, larger formats. Okay. What's happening on the two-wheeler and three-wheeler charging? And I see that smile on your face, and I know you. So there is this thing about LEV-AC, LEV-DC, that there is a standard which came in from multiple OEMs, two large OEMs competing and saying our standard is going to. So where is it? Where is that landed, or are we still groping in the dark about where the two-wheeler and three-wheeler fast charging is going to be? What's your take?
No, so see, as I said that I look at it from the point of view of that whether there is a business for us or not. Well, the first thing which I look at from that point of view.
Okay.
As a CPO who believes in the public charging infrastructure, is there a use case for being into the two-wheeler segment for charging?
Okay.
Right. First, I look from that point of view, and then it will cover answer to your questions. When I look from that point of view, then I see that all the OEMs in the two-wheeler segment either have their proprietary chargers and or they do not have the fast charging capabilities.
Okay.
Majority of them currently, except for the large ones, does not have the fast charging capabilities in the two-wheeler side.
Got it.
And the battery size is very small.
Right.
Let's say 2 kilowatt hour, 2.5 kilowatt hour. And if it is not fast charging, it means onboard charger will be of 200 watt or 300 watt. So it means a vehicle would require 6 to 7 hours to charge fully the vehicles. Now, who would stop? A two-wheeler people will stop at a public charging station for 6 hours, 7 hours.
For charging. Absolutely.
So if the majority of the vehicles are of that category, then that is not require any charging from a public charge point operator.
Okay.
Because it doesn't make a use case for us. Now, if there is a vehicle which is having the fast charging capabilities, so there are a couple of manufacturers who are doing it. Now the question is that the question came that fine, it can charge in 1 hour, 1.5 hour. That's good. Now, what will be the ticket size? 2 units. It means what is my price? 15 rupees, 20 rupees, 40 rupees. Right. Sure. Now in 1 hour, I'll be earning 40 rupees. And now what will happen? If I serve a car in 1 hour, probably I'll be getting 10 times or 15 times more revenue. To get that much of revenue, I'll have to service 15 number of customers. Right. Now, for same revenue on the car and same revenue on the two-wheeler, I'll be servicing more customer. It means more customer complaint. Right. It means more cost on the customer service.
Servicing, yes.
So there also it was not making a sense because out of those 40 rupees of ticket size, 50% is the electricity.
Yes.
And the remaining is your cost. So we felt that we might become then a customer service company instead of a charging company. Now, how it can get solved? It can get solved, and besides that, there is a problem of different connectors.
Correct.
Now, with this connector coming in by the Bureau of Indian Standards, which Ministry of Power is trying to make as a part of the guidelines, I'll be still suspicious if it is adopted across the,
Okay,
because it has not been adopted by the industry.
got it.
See, in the car side, you had an example of CCS, and all the car manufacturers,
But
whatever be the reason,
correct,
they decided and they opted in.
correct.
Now, here, if government is trying to push, there could be a backlash from other segment, because if it is believed that these standards have been articulated or promoted or lobbied by some set of companies, then the other set of companies will say,
Will not,
why should I?
not accept it.
And especially if other set of company has a large sales base,
Yes,
they would say that fine, then push for my product.
correct.
I mean, like Tesla has, by choice by the OEMs in US, they're opting for this NACS.
NACS.
So if a company is selling, let's say, lakhs and millions of two-wheelers, and if they have some one standards, and if they set up the charging infrastructure for that
will become
one,
the defect.
that becomes the defective standards.
Got it. But then this is so what you're saying is the two-wheeler one by the business use case doesn't need to go into the DC charging or DC fast charging. And second, even if it is, the battery sizes are
Too small.
correct. Now coming to NSCS, since you talked about it, this our you I know you are expecting this. A lot of conversations are going to be interesting about this, but NACS now we converge from these 5 protocols to CCS. We're now from CCS to NACS. So there is this. I'm one of those who believe, hey, listen, what's really happening now? Whether is it going to be CCS2 or NACS? Whether Tesla is going to define NACS as a global standard, again another shift. Is that something we should be worried about from CCS2 to NACS? What's happening there?
I think we exchanged our views on LinkedIn probably.
Yes.
on this particular topic. But see, I don't know much about North American market, but what I understand in India, because to understand where it become a global standards, as far as Europe is concerned, Europe is mandated that you have to have a CCS.
Okay.
So in Europe, NACS is not going to take place, because if you want to sell a car, it has to be CCS2.
Okay.
And that's why even the Nissan now, the new version Nissan has to go for a CCS. Even Tesla is selling a CCS compliant car. So that is and Europe market is a large market.
Got it.
So if you want to be a global standard, then Europe has to be in your scheme of things. So that's one. Second, let's say if next biggest market is Japan, or let's say in India. Japan, all said and done, if at all they have to allow any other standards, they would push for their own standards. That's the Shademo.
Got it. Got it.
Because by nature, Japanese are very emotional about their products.
Got it.
Shademo is their product, and I believe this is the first, DC charging standards.
It was the first and also one of the safest still. I mean, I'm told.
Yeah.
The Shademo one from a safety protocols perspective.
And in fact, Shademo is also CCS still to catch up, but the Shademo has this bidirectional charging facility. So that way, Shademo is quite evolved.
Yes.
Right. Unfortunately, it did not, do that well as CCS2 has done, but primarily it's because of the regulations from the European Union. Now, when it comes to India, when you say NACS can become the global standards, let's say they are not able to do in Europe, but they can try and do the Indian and the other markets. It means Tesla has to set up the charging infrastructure.
Yes.
I mean, nobody can predict how Tesla would do their business. But I believe that any car OEMs now coming at this stage, and especially with the new policies, which is promoting the local manufacturing of the electric car, in 3 years you'll have around 8,000 of total number of cars. How would you go and set up your infrastructure in view that fine, after 4th year I will start selling large number of cars? And during these 3 years, now the charging base, which will increase roughly from 10,000, 12,000 to surely around 50,000, 60,000 in next couple of years. Now, if you have a ready-made base of 50, 60,000,
why would you want to
charging connectors, and you are already selling a CCS2 cars in some other large market,
Hmm.
I don't see there is any reason for reinventing the wheel.
Got it.
So that's how I believe.
Now that we discussed the entire EV ecosystem, Ajay, and so obviously, thank you so much for clearing a lot of doubts around EV charging and making it a lot more simpler. With that, what we are going to do is we are going to take a break, and to our audience, this was the end of a part one with Awadhesh Ji on Maxson Mobility. And do keep watching, do like, share, subscribe until we meet next on part two on Maxson Mobility with Awadhesh Jha Ji. Thank you so much.